Hi, welcome to Piano with Georgia. I'm Georgia, and today we are going to be talking about the pedals of the piano. So hop on your bench and let's get started. So let's talk pedals. Pianos can have 3 pedals, 2 pedals, sometimes only 1 pedal. We'll discuss what each one of them does, how to train your hands and your feet to use them, and finally how to apply them to specific examples of music. There are 3 of these little guys down here on the floor. By far, the most commonly used pedal is the one that's going to be on your right-hand side, or if your piano only has 1 pedal, this is the pedal that it has. This is called the damper pedal, and what it does is it will sustain sounds even without the use of your hands anymore. This is great for when you need to move from one place to the other, but you don't want to lose the sounds and create a big gap in your music. Inside the piano, and the whole reason it's called the damper pedal, are some pieces of felt that lay upon the strings of the piano. And those strings, when we play a note, will vibrate and keep vibrating until we let the note go. At which time, that piece of felt will fall back down and touch the string and stop the vibrations, also stopping the sound. However, the pedal called the damper pedal keeps the dampers up even when you let go of the notes, so your sound doesn't go away. So the damper pedal controls the part of the piano called the dampers, but what there really are just little pieces of felt above the strings that stop and then also allow sounds to resonate. The second most commonly used pedal on the piano is the one that's on the far left side. This pedal is commonly called the soft pedal. More officially, it's called the una corda, and what it does is it will actually change the tones of sounds. Now, it's called the soft pedal because it has the reputation of making everything you play a little bit softer. And that's not true, but it's not exactly what it does. The una corda pedal will move the hammers themselves side to side. You can still play some really loud sounds even with the soft pedal down. I think the work of the soft pedal is a little bit more subtle. It's more like it's changing the mood. So maybe if you think in colors, regular sounds are reds and vibrant colors. If you put down the una corda or the soft pedal, it's going to create more of a pastel. Or if you think in shapes, it would take something from like an edgy square and turn it into more of a circle. So it's a gentler-ifier kind of pedal. Now the middle pedal on the piano depends on what piano you're on. It can do a variety of things. Some pianos, this is usually applicable if you have an upright piano, the middle pedal can go down and slide over a little bit and kind of lock down. And when you play the notes of the piano, it's really, really softened. And what that is for is called a practice pedal. So say you live in an apartment, or you have other people in your home who are sleeping and you still want to practice. You could put on that practice pedal. The piano keys will still feel largely the same, but the sounds are going to be extremely quiet. Other upright pianos will have an effect very similar to the damper pedal, but with a little twist. Instead of raising all the dampers like the damper pedal does, it will raise the dampers off the strings of any key, middle C, all the way down to the lowest note on the piano. So the bass sounds have that reverberance and sustain effect where the sounds do not release when you release the notes, but only the low side. But the real use of that middle pedal, and if you are lucky enough to be on a grand piano, what it does, is called the Sostenuto pedal. And it's basically a selective version of the damper pedal. Whatever notes you are holding down, at the time you push the pedal down, will keep holding, but none of the other keys on the piano will be at all affected. So you can do staccatos, but have that reverberance of certain notes sustaining while you do so. So let's talk about how to use these pedals. But before I talk about any pedal, let's talk about technique. How your feet should be positioned to play the pedals. The most important thing is that your bench is far enough back that you can keep the heels of your feet on the floor when you put your feet on any pedal. Those heels should totally be in contact with the floor. If your bench is too close, you will know it because, let me just illustrate that, your heel, it'll be really uncomfortable to keep on the floor, and your foot will want to operate the pedal like this. This is just using weaker muscles in the legs, and you're going to wear out faster, so we don't want that. Move that bench back until you can keep comfortably your heel on the floor. If you have more than one pedal, you're going to use your right foot to play the damper pedal always. Your right foot, its only job is the damper pedal because it is the pedal with the most nuance. Your left foot can alternate between the una corda or soft pedal and the sostenuto or middle pedal, practice pedal. If, however, you're using the middle pedal as a practice pedal, all you're going to do is push it down and slide it over, and then it'll stay. The first pedal I want to talk about would be the soft pedal. Using the left foot on the una corda, what you will do is you're going to want to push your pedal down gently and slowly, and then release it gently and slowly. If you push it down fast or release it fast, you get a thump. And that's really annoying, especially if you're playing at a level that you're trying to create such subtle nuances in sound that you're actually using the una corda pedal. We don't want thumping bad. Aside from that, you also want to make sure your foot is in contact with the pedal before you even start your piece. Because say your foot has a harder sole on the foot, that's going to create a click when your foot comes in contact with the pedal. We don't like clicking. We don't like any sounds we don't want. So have your foot kind of resting on the pedal, and you'll be able to feel it'll probably wiggle a little bit before it actually does anything. This is planned, and you can just rest your foot there without fear that it's going to engage when you don't want it to engage. Let's move over to the sostenuto pedal. Now the sostenuto pedal is very interesting and super cool, and actually very rarely used. Out of all three pedals, it's the least common. To test the sostenuto pedal on your piano, you can just play a couple of notes, can be anything, high, low, doesn't matter. I'm just going to play a couple of C's. I hold them first with my hands, then my foot captures those notes before I let my hands go. I let my hands go, and I can reactivate those sounds. Here's what's special about it though. I can play other notes and the dampers are not affected. I can be staccato, I can play fast scale, and they're not blurry. Oh, that one was because I played the C I was holding. How about this one? So that's a pretty cool effect. You might use it, say you're improvising or playing a piece of music where you have a super low chord and then you want to do something fancy up high that's kind of separated and you don't want that over blur effect. You could play a low chord. Did you see what I did there? My pedal went down at the same time my hand did, and so I didn't get the effect. This is the most commonly occurring mistake. Play with your hand, push down with your foot, then release your hand. I know some artists who will even play the keys silently before they start a piece. press the sostenuto pedal down, release, there's no sound yet, but when I hit it, it's gonna hold for me. And you could go up and do whatever else you want to do, staccato with no risk of anything sounding blurry. Now let's move on to my favorite pedal, most commonly used pedal, the damper pedal. Some people even call the damper pedal the soul of the piano because it has such power of effect and impact with emotions and sounds. So first things first, how do you use this thing? Well, you're going to want to, again, set your foot up with good technique. Heel on the floor, front part of your foot, and you'll notice I'm not all the way back on the pedal. I'm more on the front edge of the pedal. I would say the part of my foot that's touching is probably between my toes and the ball of my foot. You can kind of shimmy around your foot a little bit. You just want to be comfortable. In the long run, you are going to be using this pedal very detailedly. See how my foot is making very subtle little moves? You're going to be doing things that are this subtle. But if you're just starting out and this is kind of your first introduction to the pedal, that's going to be later down the road. Let's just talk about how to get it basically in use and by far the most common use you'll use it for. When you press down the damper pedal, much like we just talked about with the Una Corda pedal, there will be a little dip where you can push the pedal down but nothing's actually happening inside the piano. A little bit of play. You want to find that because that spot is different on every single piano you will encounter. Some pianos you will feel like you have to push the pedal almost all the way to the floor before it does anything. Other pianos, if you just barely touch it, it starts sustaining the sound. So definitely experiment before you're going to play a piece on any piano that you're unfamiliar with. Now when you do, test out where the pedal engages. Push it down a little bit and you'll start to feel resistance. That's where things are happening. Again, if you have a grand piano, you can peer inside the piano and see where the dampers start to move and then where the dampers are completely off the strings. There is such a thing as a half pedal where you actually do want the dampers just a teeny weeny little bit off the strings. And so you want to know where that spot is as well. Most of the time, you're going to be using dampers fully off the strings. The other extreme of the piano, besides all the way off, is all the way on, when you push your foot all the way down to the floor. Now, usually, you're not going to push the pedal this far. You just don't want to work that hard. Look how far my foot needs to travel to get it all the way down. If I'm trying to do a quick change of my pedal, that's going to take too long. And do you hear that? It's noisy. You want a pedal so that it's not coming quite all the way up and it's not going all the way down and it's You might hear the dampers moving a little bit as I'm not playing anything, but that's going to be completely covered up, masked by the sounds of your playing. And now the fun part. Let's put it into action. One of my favorite exercises to get going with the pedal is to use only one finger to try to play a very smooth scale. When we use all of our fingers to play a scale, I can make it sound like this. All my tones are completely connected one to the next. To use the foot to make this happen, I'm going to take away my ability to keep it smooth and just limit myself to one finger. And if I do this without the pedal, you hear a gap between every single note. To eliminate that gap, I'm going to use the pedal. So here's the basic move. You have to play a note with your finger to start the sound. Then you want to push your pedal down to catch the sound. Now I can move my hand, the sound is still going. Here's the tricky part. When I'm ready to play the next sound, my foot has to come up at the same time my finger goes down. Now I can recapture the note in the pedal before my hand leaves. Now my hand can move. Again, as I go down, my foot goes up at the same time. And then I can move. Up, down, moving my hand. Up, down, Now I can move my hand. Let's do that again. Like I said, this is the trickiest part. 100% I guarantee what your foot is going to want to do is this. Matching your hand, which might give a little more reverberation on the note that you're playing it on, but we end up with the same gaps between our notes, and we don't want that. So I like to give myself a little chant to say while I'm doing this. The first note that you play is kind of like a freebie. You can push your note down, you can push your pedal down. The next one is where the timing really is crucial. So think up, down, move. Up, down, move. Up, down, move my hand. Up, down, ta-da! That's the basic motion that your foot and your hand need to acquire to create smooth sounds without the need for smooth fingers. Now, one thing that's commonly said about the pedal is that we actually pedal with our ears. And what we mean by that as teachers when we say this is that you have to listen carefully to make sure that this timing happens just right. Let me play you the two things you're listening for that you don't want to do. The first thing would be, as I already demonstrated earlier, if your foot lifts with your hand or lifts too early, you will hear gaps. The other thing you're going to listen for would be blurred sounds. If you hear a blurred sound, this means your foot was too late. And it would sound something like this. Did you hear how my sounds were blurry? So you're listening for breaks in your sound, meaning your foot went too early. You're also listening for blurs, meaning your foot changed the pedal too late. And now let's use an example that would be much more commonly found in a piece of music. You've done this exercise, you've worked on getting those pedal changes. The most common use of the damper pedal would be when you are moving off of a bass note that you don't want to lose. So I'm going to set up my foot, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a left hand pattern that I'm going to have to release my lowest note to get up to play some other notes. And I need to catch that low note in my pedal and hold it. Then I'm going to switch to another chord of the same pattern, and I want a clean break in the sound, but again, not losing my bass notes. So here's an example of something that's very commonly found in your music and that you can practice. And by the way, you can press down your pedal before you start to play. You can also press down the pedal after your first note, or you can press them down at the same time. You have such flexibility on the first note. A lot of times I will very quietly push it down before I start, so I'm ready. So here we go. Here's my pattern. Now I can't possibly reach all of that. So do you hear I haven't lost my low note? Now I'm going to change and I'm going to start that pattern on an F. Here I go. The moment I play that F, the pedal needs to come up and get down before my 5 leaves it. That's the tricky part. Not letting your finger move away too fast so that your foot can't catch it. Back to C. Quick little up, down. And you might notice that as I play this pattern, I actually try to hold my pinky down a little bit longer so that my foot can catch it. So I might hold it while I play that one, making my foot's job a little bit easier. Another example would be big jumps. So let's say you're going to play something really low and you need to jump up and play a chord. We don't want to lose those low Cs. And sometimes when you jump up and play a chord, you jump back down and you play a different note, which is where the pedal has to change. Again, when these are occurring quickly in your music, your foot has a very difficult job of grabbing the notes quickly before your hands leave, otherwise you miss it. Let me show you what that would sound like. So at the first part, it's easy. I just hold. Now my hands, if I move off too quickly, my hand kind of caught it, but not really. It's not what I want. So stay with your hands as long as you can to make sure your foot gets down. You will get faster feet the more you practice this. Now let's look at how this is written in your music. Composers have a way of writing down pedal marks to tell you what they had in their minds as far as where they want the pedals to hold, where they want the pedals to change. Because a lot of times composers do want a little bit of that blurring effect because it sounds nice. But other times they'll want it very clean and cleared out. And if any of you are composing, you would want that communicated to anyone else who might be interpreting your music down the road. First example, this piece of music demonstrates a pedal mark that is the most popular and commonly used pedal mark in music today. So what you have is you have a little downward motion where your pedal goes down, and then as long as that line is solid, you hold it. And then when it has that little up, down, that's telling you where your foot should lift up and go back down. So it's probably the most visually connected to what you actually do. So as I look at this piece of music, I know that as I set up to play, pedal foot on the floor, I get my hands set up in position and I can push my pedal down right with the first note, and then I'm gonna play, then I'm gonna change and change. And again, listen for either a blurry sound or a gap in your sound on your pedal changes. The other thing that's really important here is less about the timing and it's about the thumping. You don't want the thumping sound. Here's an example of what my music would sound like if I have a thumpy pedal. Everything's so beautiful. You might not hear it, but you probably do. A lot of times at student recitals, I'll hear people pedaling with great timing. However, it's going every time they change the pedal. So that is something to also listen for. And remember, the way to fix that is to not lift the pedal all the way up or push it all the way to the floor as you make your pedal changes. There's that spot in there where it'll engage, and you want to keep your foot in that zone. Now, another type of pedal mark you might see in music, especially if you're playing classical music, but some composers still use it to this day. It's always available in notation softwares. It looks like you see the little word Leo in your music. Well, that's actually just a cursive version of the abbreviation for PED. When you see PED in your music, that means you want to push the pedal down. When you see this little asterisk looking symbol, that means you lift the pedal up. Now, sometimes these aren't placed exactly perfectly in the music, which is why they aren't as popular as the other pedal mark. And another way they might do it is instead of using the asterisk, they'll just have a new PED abbreviation, which would mean you change the pedal. So there's a lot less exactness about this particular symbol, but in this piece of music here, what Chopin is telling me to do is to play, change. And then you notice it's gone. This does not mean that Chopin wants me to not pedal anymore. He's simply demonstrating for me that he wants me to pedal in this style, and then I'm supposed to assume to continue the style. Composers do that a lot. They give you a little information and then they expect you to carry it forward. The next example, this is a piece of music that there is no pedal mark at all. However, if you listen to professional recordings or the composer himself in Audi playing this, you absolutely can tell that the composer is constantly using the pedal. This refers back to that whole idea of pedaling with your ear. You want to experiment and listen for it, and usually you're going to be changing the pedal every time the chord changes. And here's what that would sound like. Set up the pedal foot, and then right as I approach the next notes, there's a new bass note, which is the biggest hint that the chord is changing. Quick little up, down, I change again, change. But here, you can decide, do you like that little blurriness that's there right now, or would you prefer a quick pedal change so it's more clear? Lots of personal preference goes into pedaling. There's not always a right answer or a wrong answer. There's the way you like to play it answer. Now, the other type of music that you may be playing from might be a lead sheet or a chord chart. You definitely want to use a lot of pedal when you're playing from these types of scores. Generally speaking, every time you have a new alphabet letter, that's when you want to change your pedal. Now again, use your ear. If it starts sounding like too much sound has collected, add another pedal change. If it sounds like maybe you like two different chords blended together, then don't change the pedal. Totally your preference as the artist. So let's see an example. Here I have a lead sheet, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get my foot set up with good technique, and then my left hand is gonna be playing, some of the chord, whatever accompaniment pattern you might want. Now right there, I'm still in the measure with my C chord. To me, that little sounded a little bit more blurry than I wanted. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to toy around with it, play with it. Maybe I change and still much. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I pedal and maybe I take it off completely. Now you notice that time all my sound went away because I wasn't holding anything with my left hand. There will definitely be times where even though you're using the pedal for a nice reverberating effect, you want to hold the notes with your hand so that you can do a pedal change and not lose some of the notes, just lose others of the notes. Kind of like the sostenuto, but done with your hand. So an example of that would be if I play, hold the left hand, and leave my right hand nice and clear. So options, so many options. Now let's just say I follow exactly the alphabet letters. Then I would be playing my left hand, and then when I hit that G7, change. When I hit the C, change. A minor, change the pedal. And you can use whatever accompaniment style, of course, you want for whatever lead sheet you're playing from. Or if you're kind of new to playing from lead sheets, chord charts, and you're just playing a chord, it's the same thing. You use the pedal, capture the sound, move your hand, get ready, up, down, then you can move again. That up, down, and keeping your hand there until you've caught the sounds in your pedal will always be a very tricky part of using the pedal. But as you use the pedal more and more, and as you get used to the sounds you hear in your imagination and that you're trying to reproduce with your hands and your foot, you will find it becomes a bit automated. You can test out different pedalings, how long you hold it. One person may like something held for 2 measures. The other person may like something held for half of a measure. And it sounds good either way. It's just personal preference. So I hope this video on how the pedals work, what they are, and how to apply them to your music, as well as little exercises to just get good at using them, is very helpful to you in your practice. And as always, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you soon.